Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the messaging we're seeing coming out of, and finally the messaging we're seeing coming out of the mainstream media is exactly what we've been saying on this program for years. People need to make more money. We need higher wages. And the way you do that is pretty simple. You join and form unions. Wages are too low because workers don't have the bargaining power to go and demand those better wages, hours, and conditions that unions do so well, which is why corporate America for so long has done, well, so much to repress and to hold down people's ability. Why did Amazon spend $200 million to stop 5,000 workers from organizing? Oh, that's right. They might want better wages, hours, conditions. If you saw the most recent report out, the minimum wage, had it kept up with productivity, would be like $26 an hour. That's what.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It is, well, remembering the anniversary, and I hate using that word, and I don't know a different word to use to mark the 20th occasion, memorial moment of one of the most tragic, one of the most horrific moments in our nation's history. And it's, it's one of those moments in life that you will never forget. And we swear that every year when 9/11 comes around, we swear we're never going to forget. And honestly, I don't know how we can. If you were alive in this moment, I don't know how you can forget that day. But as we remember the tragic events of 9/11, for me, it's one of these moments to reflect on, and I remember every detail. It's one of a handful of days in my life that I remember, the minutest of details, where you were, what you were doing, the smells, the sounds, all kinds of stuff that you would have on any other given day would have never registered. And, there are a handful of those days in our lives that are that traumatic. And sadly, it's usually the traumatic days that stick with us. The days that we're happiest, those not quite as much, but it's those days that cause pain. It's those days that made us, afraid, that we, angry. Those seem to stick with us. And maybe it's just me, but I've got a couple of those days in my life, 9/11 being one of them. The day my mother passed, the other one. I remember every minute detail from the morning to the night, to the moment that my grandmother and my aunt told me that she was gone. I remember everything, the sounds, the smells, everything. And that's what a 9/11 does to us. And it's one of those things I think and I hope has the ability to unite us. That in this moment of pain, in this moment of anger, in this moment of fear, all this emotion, that we can empathize, we can reach out to each other, we can talk, we can find some unity in these moments. Look, we're horribly polarized, but for anyone who was alive on 9/11, if you didn't matter who you voted for, didn't matter who, and it was just, the election was just a couple of months earlier, did not matter to a person, we were on the same page. We had a moment of absolute unity, to where as a nation we came together. And look, these kind of moments, it's been 20 years since that happened. This is one of those milestones that maybe we have the moment to look back. And I woke up today and I'm sitting and I'm thinking about, as I do every time September 11th rolls around, I remember, the day, I remember where I was. I got up really early. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. I got up. For me, I'm a night person. So I got up like 6 o'clock in the morning because we had to take my grandmother to the Cleveland Clinic to get her knee replaced. And this was it was going to be a good day because she was miserably in pain. This was going to be something that was going to help transform her life. She was going to be able to be mobile again. We were looking at it as a really positive thing. She was looking forward to it, going to get this done, going to be out of misery. And, we got to the clinic at like 6 o'clock in the morning. It was really, I remember just being ungodly early. And the world, in that moment that she was out, from 8 o'clock till whatever, 9:30-ish, 10 o'clock when the surgery was going on, the world changed. She was sedated in one world and woke up in another. And, I was thinking today about, the ride over and the conversation about how this was a new beginning and this was going to be really great. And she was going to, all the hopes and the thoughts going forward, and me busting her shoes for not taking water classes and all kinds of, that stuff. And I just remember it was the most beautiful blue day out. And I don't know if that's the frame that everybody has picked up on and that's why it sticks. But I remember with such clarity going, man, and us talking about it, that it was an incredibly beautiful day that morning. Crisp blue skies, clear, incredible. And, upbeat and positive. And then, while she's in surgery, we heard the first report where, the family's sitting in the lobby, where they had, big common area they have at the Cleveland Clinic with TVs around, and, the reports come on, and all of a sudden, you hear, this rumble of, oh my gosh, these people who are, sobbing. And we didn't know why, because we were just sitting around talking. And then we saw the video of the second plane hitting the tower, and it was like dead silence. There was nothing. You could hear a pin drop, and there were probably 100+ people around us at that moment. We were just packed into this area where everybody was glued to that one TV set. And, the emotions that came out, stunned, just literally stunned. And, I remember talking to a person who was going, what is this? Is this an accident? And I'm going, I don't see how it can be. One bad pilot I get, but two, and then we heard the Pentagon, and then we heard more as the day went on. We heard more and more and more, because look, it wasn't the instant world that we live in now. There wasn't Twitter to go, oh, this is what's happening in real time. We were glued to televisions. We were glued to radios. We were looking for information. It wasn't the kind of immediacy that we expect today. And when she woke up, we obviously didn't tell her, we wanted her to get through it. But as I went home that night, I went back to her house to get some sleep before the next day, it dawned on me that, and it really hit me, because there's a picture of my grandmother and my grandfather in his army uniform. He fought in World War II. It dawned on me that, she has lived through so much. That generation, what we call the greatest generation, they saw so much. I mean, from Pearl Harbor, the Depression, Pearl Harbor, Korea, Vietnam, all through the 70s, all of the turmoil in that, the Reagan era of the 80s, the Cold War, all of these things that they lived through, and did so with just incredible passion and vision. And this is where, look, my grandparents weren't, gung ho. They got up, they went to work, they worked really hard, they supported their family, and they moved ahead as positively as they could. And I remember the next day I went back, and she said, we talked about something happened, because she didn't know. So I said, look, the country's under attack, this happened. And immediately she hearkened back to Pearl Harbor, and she told the story about how she found out what had happened. And it was like a day later, on a radio broadcast that that stuff just didn't get that far that quick. And how the sacrifices that they made. And she spent the rest of the day, kind of a little drugged up, but kind of, still lucid, telling the story of being a young person, living through a young woman, living through what was, the World War II era, and the sacrifices and the struggles. And she was, kind of going, we're going to go through this again. This is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to pull together as we had in past generations, because we don't have a choice. She goes, this is the moment where, the country's going to have to come together. And she told, all these stories about, they were rationing food, they were rationing all kinds of stuff during World War II, and the kind of sacrifices that they made. In fact, one of the stories she told is, the women used to like to wear stockings or nylons or whatever that is, and they didn't have it because the war effort. You had to give everything over. There were no luxuries during this period, and they used to take like a marker or a pen or something and draw a line up the back of their leg to make it look like they were wearing stockings. And I just thought that was the weirdest thing, but it's one of those attempts at normalcy. One of those attempts at going, you know what? You're not going to take our humanity. You're not going to take what we want. We're still going to get through this. And it was one of those little, and I don't know why that stuck with me, but it was one of those little things that you go, we're going to be all right. We're going to find a way through. And I got to give you credit. I got to give her credit. In that moment, she was the most upbeat person I met. She said, we'll get through it. We always do. Now, look, my grandmother was not the most, flag waving, patriotic. She didn't go parade on the parade days. She didn't, fly flags everywhere. But she had the mindset that we're going to get through it. And there's part of me that goes, their mentality is we're going to get through it because we don't have a choice. We're going to have to fight this. We're going to have to move this forward. And that day forward, I'll tell you that conversation that day with her stuck with me because it's given me a bit of this kind of optimism that, we're going to be okay. No matter what comes up, as polarized as we are as a nation now, I still think we're going to be okay. We've been through tumultuous times before. We've been through times of civil war. We've been through times of strife. We've been through times of depression and recession. And we've been through these things. And it's days like, it's moments like this where we're remembering horrible tragedies and we're feeling for the victims and sorrow for the families and resolve to never forget. But to never forget in a positive way. That we did rebuild, that we did pick ourselves up, that we did move forward. Now, I do have some problems with some of the things that have happened, but we can still change those. As I've been talking about on the show all week, this idea that this surveillance state has popped up around us, the country that my kids are inheriting, not the country I grew up in. And we can change that. Just as they did all of these things, we can undo them. I remember we had done our labor history tour back in 2013. And my oldest daughter was conceived right around the time of 9/11. So she knows nothing about it. She wasn't around. She knows nothing about it. We had gone to the George W. Bush Presidential Library in Dallas. And right when you walk into the facility, there's all of the twisted metal from 9/11. And there are all the videos lining the walls of, every possible video that you could have seen at the time. And, the look on her face as she walked through it. And the way it affected her. It was one of those things that kind of stuck with me. And on the other side, as we're going through with it, I'm saying, look, this was a horribly tragic event. These things happen. It's how you react. It's what you do to move forward. It's picking yourself up. It's like anything. It's how you're going to react from it and how you're going to move forward. And, she struggled with it for a bit because, when you stop and you see the horrible videos of the tragedy of loss of life and the thousands of people who, just the night before got up like any other, went to bed like any other night going, you know what, tomorrow I got to go to work. I got to feed the kids. I got to pay the bills. I got to do all this stuff. And then the world changes. The thing is we as a country, we've been through moments in our history that's tested our resolve, that's tested our faith in the future. And we're living through one right now. The pandemic wasn't, this thing that hit us in one day. But this is a major thing that most people are never going to forget. They're never going to forget the person who maybe they knew someone who died, and I've known several. They're never going to forget, the horrible stories and the tragedies and all of that. Because this is one of our moments. Like the greatest generation who lived through numerous and deep and difficult tragedies. This is ours. This is our moment. And for me, the idea is, and we're failing this test in my view right now. And I'm hoping Joe Biden is the guy who's leading us forward. I was happy with his speech yesterday, that we're going through it and we've had enough. It's time to do the work. But I'm hoping this is one of those moments where the silent majority, the folks who like my grandmother, just got up and kept moving forward, who kept getting up and going to work and doing what they have to do to keep their families afloat, to keep themselves on the right path, finally say enough already and move us through this so that 20 years down the line, 30 years, 40, 50 years down the line, our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren look back and go, you know what? They rose to the occasion. They rose to the moment. They did what had to be done. And this is what I say about my grandparents' generation. They did what they had to do. They got up every day, and it was hard. It was hard. She told stories that were just, painful. But they got up every day, and they kept moving forward because they didn't have much of a choice. What are your options? And for us, in this moment, yes, remember, never forget 9/11. And it's not like we can even if we wanted to, for those of us who are alive. But resolve to make things better. Resolve to go in a direction that's gonna make a better tomorrow for our kids and our grandkids. And to leave a better place, like my grandparents' generation did for us. It's that simple for me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you remember? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell me your stories. I'd love to hear it. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2012. That was the day the Chicago Teachers Union walked off the job for the first time in 25 years. The historic week-long strike resonated nationwide among trade unionists and served to reinvigorate the labor movement. Certainly, higher wages and better benefits were among the teachers' demands. The city's mayor, Rahm Emanuel, had canceled the union's wage increase, laid off close to 1,000 teachers, and went on the attack against seniority rights and working conditions. The strike enjoyed wide public support among parents and the public. Teachers emphasized broader educational problems they faced, namely the attacks fueled by corporate privatization. They wanted a return to more traditional forms of education rather than simply preparing students for endless rounds of testing. They wanted more art, music, and gym classes. and they demanded stable funding for social support services for the most vulnerable at-risk students. Union teachers understood that the Board of Education was using standardized testing to get rid of teachers and schools in order to privatize education, all in the name of turning around failing schools and helping the kids. Though the contract was less than perfect, it showed the power working people have to hold the line against continued assaults on their standards of living, especially in the public sector. The CTU was able to beat back attempts at merit pay and increased use of student test scores in teacher evaluations. They won first-time recall rights, supply reimbursements, and liberal arts classes. There were concessions, however, made on seniority rights, pay for laid-off teachers, and longer workdays. But the CTU demonstrated that strikes can win in a period of extended anti-union onslaughts.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the messaging we're seeing coming out of, and finally the messaging we're seeing coming out of the mainstream media is exactly what we've been saying on this program for years. People need to make more money. We need higher wages. And the way you do that is pretty simple. You join and form unions. Wages are too low because workers don't have the bargaining power to go and demand those better wages, hours, and conditions that unions do so well, which is why corporate America for so long has done, well, so much to repress and to hold down people's ability. Why did Amazon spend $200 million to stop 5,000 workers from organizing? Oh, that's right. They might want better wages, hours, conditions. If you saw the most recent report out, the minimum wage, had it kept up with productivity, would be like $26 an hour. That's what they're afraid of. And here to share some thoughts on, well, how do we get there? I've asked Christian Weller to come talk with us. Christian's a professor of public policy at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. There's a new report out by the Center for American Progress that shows just how unions could help raise those wages and also close the massive inequality gap. Christian Weller, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Rick.
So I'm looking at this and I'm going, Christian, this is, for me, seems like old hat. This is something I've been saying for now 16 years we need to be doing. Finally, there's some folks going, maybe you're right.
Well, thank you very much. What we're doing is we're combining some of the insights that from other researchers and from people like you who've been saying unions are doing a bunch of good things for their members. And we're putting the numbers together and saying, when unions do these good things under collective bargaining agreements, what you see is union members ending up with more wealth than non-union members. And that benefit, that wealth premium, that extra wealth, home ownership, retirement savings in particular, is particularly large for Black and Latino workers. So to give you a sense, union members generally have about twice as much wealth as non-union members. The result of that is that comes about because union members earn more money. That's the wage premium that we know. The second part is they have more stable jobs. We often overlook that as a key benefit of what unions do. They give workers a voice at work, and that increases job stability. And that translates into more financial planning. People are willing to take more risks for their future, put more money aside because they have to plan for fewer emergencies because they're not going to be laid off the next day. And then the other part is in the same vein that union members have more benefits. They have defined benefit accounts, they have better health insurance plans, they have a number of other benefits, which then also makes it easier for people to say, like, look, I don't have to worry about how do I pay my healthcare. I can now put more money into my retirement account. And so all of these things together, they add up over a lifetime, over careers. And that's reflected in the sort of that union wealth premium, that union members have more wealth. Now, that union wealth premium, as I said, it's 2-to-1 on average, right, but it's 3-to-1 for Black workers, and it's 5-to-1 for Latino workers. And why is that? Well, because people of color, workers of color, are still being discriminated against, steered towards worse jobs than white workers in the private sector. unions level the playing field for everybody, regardless of your race, ethnicity, gender, gender orientation, sexual orientation, and all of that. That helps to lift up all the boats. It levels the playing field, and because you're coming from a worse position, if you're part of a marginalized group, that lifting up is much higher from your starting position for people of color than it is for white people.
Right. No, but this is one of those things where, I go back to the reality that all jobs at one point were horrible jobs. You think about the truck driving jobs that my grandparents, took, 80 years ago, that were basically sweatshops on wheels, the factory jobs that were horrible, dangerous, poverty wage jobs. And it's unions that brought these jobs into the middle class. And so, as you're saying, people are being steered towards, less desirable jobs, more dangerous, lower paying ones. How we make those better jobs, because I don't believe there's a bad job, just bad people to work for at poverty and desperation wages. But we could pull those into the 21st century and make them those living wage jobs that we need.
Right. And union is a primary vehicle to doing that. Again, what we highlight in the report and what we found in the data, and we've done this a number of times with various data sources, is that the vehicle, unions generate more than just higher wages. Like, I cannot emphasize it enough. Dignity and stability at work matter a lot.
Yep.
And that's a huge benefit. People feel it immediately because they don't have to worry about it. But we are also arguing that they feel it down the road because they have more money saved for their retirement. And to your point, why are unions the primary vehicle? There aren't that many other sort of things I could snap my finger at and say, like, here is one policy intervention we can do that it can achieve all of these things, that create better jobs, better paying jobs, higher benefits, greater job stability, and that then translate into more wealth with one fell swoop. There is, in many cases, it's very difficult to achieve that even with a battery of government policies. So making it easier for people to join a union is sort of the kind of silver bullet we're looking for.
No, absolutely.
Because it does.
And
it
it
does
goes back
raise
to
the living standards now and into the future.
Right. But this is exactly why someone like Amazon is going to spend $200 million. Like St. Vincent's Hospital up in Worcester, Massachusetts, they're going to spend over $100 million. Why these big companies spend all this money denying their workers just the small ability to have some say. This is why they don't want to share. Because, as I said, the minimum wage, had minimum wage just kept up with productivity, it'd be like $26 an hour. If you had a strong work union in the workplace, they'd be demanding that $26 an hour, because we're told, Christian, we live in a meritocracy. The harder you work, the more you make. It's a meritocracy.
It can't be. All right. So like you and I know that, like, it's not just about the wages, right? Amazon is afraid that if there is a union, they no longer can have their workers pee in bottles, right? It's about the control, the exploitation, the controlling these massive warehouses, the isolation and undignified work that many workers work in these warehouses, and the exploitation that comes with it, and then being fired or let go at any moment's notice if you didn't meet certain arbitrary goals. And that's, I think, what we often forget, that unions are not more, like, because an Amazon will say, like, well, you know what, we're fend this off by raising your wages for $15, and people will still want a union because that's not enough, because we want to have control over our life. We want to be pushing back against this arbitrariness in the workplace that has sort of proliferated in the modern workplace. It's not just the truck drivers of the old days. It is the warehouse workers of the modern days that feel the brunt of this, like, ever more profit so that Jeff Bezos can fly to outer space.
No, but it's not just warehouse workers or truck drivers. It's all workers. Every person who goes and works for somebody should have the dignity and respect of a voice on the job. And I say this all the time, because you're right. I'm the living embodiment of what you're talking about. I entered the workforce, had some job security, knowing that the only way I can be fired from the job that I have is if I do something wrong, and that I have due process rights. This concept of at-will employment, I've never understood why you'd allow yourself to be put in that, because with a union contract, you have the ability to defend yourself. that gives me and other people, as you've pointed out, the ability to make long-term decisions knowing that I'm going to have job security because I'm not going to make huge mistakes. I'm not going to really screw something up badly that's going to get me fired. And this is where I think that's part of the messaging as well, especially in this moment of pandemic where people should be paying attention to this.
Yeah, and on a practical level, right? So what has happened with unions declining, employers have been pushing the envelope on like how else can we screw over workers? And one of the things is that I find particularly pernicious in healthcare, in retail, and other sectors is in the so-called frontline industries of the pandemic, right? Is scheduling at on demand, where people basically have to sit at home waiting for their employers to call them to work for certain hours, but they're not being paid for the time that they're setting aside during the day. So in that kind of creates enormous financial instability and risks for individuals. And those kinds of trends unions can definitely push back on and push back on. I cannot say it often enough. The benefits of joining unions goes well beyond just higher wages.
Right. But here's the thing, and this is where I come back to this in this moment, because the wealth class of this country has done such a good job of dividing and I would argue even conquering. You know, the old Jay Gould quote, I can pay half the working class to murder the other half. They've done such a good job of convincing workers that they don't need unions, that they're somehow smarter or better able to negotiate or whatever. And that unions are a thing of the past. How do you see the messaging coming out of this to go, wait a second, look around at what's going on, poverty wages, desperate working conditions, long hours, even in union workshops. How do you get that messaging to move forward to pick up on what you're talking about?
Well, I think there's two things. One, I think generally people are very relatively positive towards unions, and the trend has grown over time. This is just another argument. We're making the argument here that the combination of all the benefits you get today from a union contract translates into greater financial security in the future. But in the end, it is a policy issue. We have to get Washington to pay greater attention to pushing back on illegal activities, on employer power, and level the playing field so that workers who want to form a union, want to join a union, can actually do that. There's a reason why Amazon spends hundreds of millions of dollars, because they know on fighting back a union, because they know people are fed up. They want a union. They want that voice. And right now, they're paying the money for management consultants, anti-union law firms, and for anti-union lawmakers. And I think in the end, this is a political decision that we have to take to Washington.
No, I'm right there with you. This is where, again, I go back to my grandparents' generation, since we talked about them a little bit earlier. You know, they came back after fighting World War II, and they went to the shop floor and they fought for an incredible standard of living, and through their fighting, built the largest, most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. And it was because they had good policy that it enabled them to get what they wanted, which was demanding the ability to join and form unions. Those laws haven't changed since that era. So we're in this moment where we need something at the minimum of the PRO Act, and I would argue even something even stronger than that, but it doesn't look politically possible in this moment, at least not to me.
I honestly don't know the politics exactly of it. Right now, there is so much on the plate of lawmakers, and we're clearly divided on the government in Congress to get things done. I think there's generally a lot of appetite among progressives to do more, but it will take a massive effort. And yeah, I'm not super hopeful. Yeah. But on the other hand, we got to remember one thing unions are really good at is organizing. And so organize as much as you can, build coalitions, and fight for lawmakers that will ultimately enact legislation, regulation that will benefit workers. And I think you made the point earlier, we're at this particular point in time with the pandemic. People were exploited even before the pandemic. Remember, we had all these teacher strikes in states where we wouldn't expect it,
correct,
right? Where unions weren't particularly strong. And I think that undercurrent of people are sick of being exploited is still there. And right now, people are voting with their feet. They're leaving employers. Eventually, or they're coming back, and at that point, they're still angry about being taken advantage of and being pushed around. And I can see sort of more and more movements to organizing the Amazons and the Starbucks of the world.
Well, we have to. And look, and all the other the occupations, because I do a little bit of talking to workers around the country, and they're all telling the same thing. They're overworked. They're underpaid. They're starting to get a couple of dollars more. There's some incentives being thrown out to get people to come to work, and wages are ticking up a bit. But I fear down the road, those employers, they claw those back, just like they did in the 90s, and we end up, higher prices and lower wages and a working class that's much worse off.
And people know that. And the other part is also one thing, like we're talking wealth here. Prior to the crisis, the typical American family had very, very little wealth to begin with. That's why the crisis was so severe. And that's why the government, even the Trump administration, had to step in with trillions of dollars to help out families. People don't want to go back to that kind of financial insecurity. And people are not dumb. They know that those $2 extra per hour they're getting right now will disappear as soon as things sort of turn back to normal. That their employers are not doing this because they're kind-hearted. They're doing this because they want to get them into the door now, but they're going to take it back and kick them to the curb as soon as they can.
And that to me right there is the number one reason that in this moment you go, now's the time to form a union, because we get this stuff in writing. We get it on paper, right, and we make sure that they can't claw it back, because that's one of the things unions do really well. They fight for things and then they fight to keep them.
Right. Like you want to get this on paper, and you want to make sure you not only have the extra wages, but you're also going to keep your job, and that there is a way to talk to your managers about reasonable schedule and due process and employment stability and all the other things that unions generate.
Yeah, since I've got you, I got another minute. I want to, we keep hearing about this inflation that's going on, and prices are going up. Are you concerned long term that this is going to be a problem?
No, I'm not concerned. I do hear people's concerns, but let me just be very clear. Inflation is very isolated in a few products. Used cars, vacation homes, that's sort of where prices have gone up. But inflation means prices are going up. What people are really concerned with when we see focus groups and polling numbers is actually stuff where prices haven't risen, but they just cost too much. And that is healthcare, childcare, prescription drugs. Interestingly, healthcare and prescription drugs prices have gone down, but like in focus groups and polling numbers, people are really worried about it. Not because prices have gone up, because the stuff just costs so much. And again, unions can offset that by higher wages. The administration is steering back through a number of other things by alleviating some of the costs through the child tax credits, by proposing to invest more money in childcare and other care jobs, and so on and so forth, lifting up people's wages, incomes, and reducing their costs for things that actually do cost a lot of money. So there are two separate things. One is inflation, which I'm not worried about, and then the other one is the cost of necessities like childcare and healthcare that I am worried about, and that I'm happy to see that the administration is proposing, already doing a lot, and proposing to do more.
I'm glad to hear that, because a lot of people freaking out. But if you want to check out the piece, unions help increase wealth for all and close the racial wealth gaps. We'll get links at the Center for American Progress's website, how you can get that, americanprogress.org. Christian, I appreciate you taking some time for us, sharing your expertise. As always, good stuff.
Good being with you. Have a good afternoon.
You as well. Thanks so much, our good friend Christian Weller. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2 on
On this day in labor history, the year was 1859. That was the day that the St. Anthony and Minneapolis Typographical Union number 42 was founded in Minnesota. It was one of the oldest unions on record in the state. 3 years earlier, printers in St. Paul had formed a union, Local 30, with a dinner to honor Benjamin Franklin's birthday. At the time, just over 6,000 white people lived in the state of Minnesota. Typographical workers were very important to the early labor movement in the United States. These printers were vital to spreading the word about the cause of labor to other workers in the era before radio, television, or computers. In Minnesota, 8 journeyman printers joined together to form Local 42. According to the History of Hennepin County and the City of Minneapolis, published in 1881, quote, the union was prosperous, having at one time on its list every journeyman printer within its jurisdiction. The War of the Rebellion practically dissolved the organization, 5 of its members entering the Union Army. Like it did for many fledgling unions, the Civil War took its toll on the Typographical Union Local 42 membership. One member, H.M. Metcalf, was killed in battle. The union was disbanded during the Civil War, reforming a decade later. Although the Civil War had disrupted labor organizing across the North, the years following the conflict saw a surge in labor activity. Wages stagnated during the war, while prices for goods continued to soar. Workers banded together for fair pay and against the exploitation that grew along with increasing industrialization. These early labor unions were prominently made up of skilled workers like these printers.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Like I said, I think this report, a good one we absolutely need when you look at the fact that, just right on the surface, that the union advantage is double the wealth that a worker would have over a lifetime. I mean, to me, that's the answer right there. And, I look at Amazon spending $200 million in one place. You think of the millions of dollars the Walmarts, the Targets, all of these places have paid just to stay union free, which means poverty wages, which means, struggling to make ends meet, which means, at will employment, which means all of the things that, we've been talking about on this show for years. But when you see it in the actual numbers, and it's one of those things that I've kind of taken for granted because, look, I've been very fortunate in my working life. I've always had a good paying union job. I've always had the kind of job security that I never worried about, hey, am I going to get laid off tomorrow? Am I going to get fired tomorrow? Or, is something bad going to happen? So I've always been able to plan for the future, and I've always had a defined benefit pension that I know once I get to a certain age, I get 30 years in at a certain age, this is what I'm going to get. I can plan for retirement. Sadly, and this is where, I reach out to people who don't get it and have truly have been abused by our economy. There are things I take for granted. And it took me years to wake up to it. But this is one of those things that I hadn't, until I saw the numbers, that the difference between the job that I do and a guy who does a similar job, but the difference is I've got a union card and I've got a union contract and I'm protected by that contract. And this person who is an at-will employee who, doesn't get what I have been a part of fighting for. And our wealth over the lifetime is, I have double the accumulated wealth that he has. How is that reasonable? And then why are you willing to go, no, I don't. I've had people tell me, I don't need no stinking union. I'll make my own deal. Well, evidently you've made a bad one. And this, I look at this frame and it so fits something my grandfather always said. He said, if a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you you don't need something, you better spend two to get it. Because he understands return on investment. This is what he was talking about. And he didn't even know it. But he did know that if Jeff Bezos is going to take money out of his phallic-looking space program or his giant bathtub boat to tell a bunch of workers in Alabama, a no-rights at work state to begin with, that they don't need a union, that they should do it without dues, that he doesn't understand exactly what benefits him, it's really quite incredible. And when I sit and I think about this, it's one of these moments where to me the light bulb is on. For me, the idea of, so let me get this straight. I'm going to go into a workplace where I have no rights, where the boss is king, can fire me for any reason or no reason. Nephew needs a job. Sorry, good luck. Didn't like the color of your tennis shoes today. Sorry, go home. Where you have no voice whatsoever. You have an open door. There's an open door policy. Every employer claims an open door policy. But yet then we hear these stories like Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's, a couple of employees said, hey, we don't think you're doing enough to protect us from COVID. Here's a bunch of things we think you're doing wrong, and here's what we think you should be doing right. Right into the suggestion box. And what'd they get? They got a termination notice telling them, sorry, you're an at-will employee. You're not Trader Joe's material. And those people had no recourse. Why? No contract. No rights to the job. This is mind-blowing to me. Every CEO in this country has a contract that protects their rights, but yet they don't think that the person who's actually creating the wealth, the person who's actually doing the work, putting their blood, sweat, tear, the ache of their back, that the ones who are making it, that they shouldn't have similar protections, similar voice, similar opportunities. It's insane to me. And it's really become this political thing. And I don't understand it. Because, when I first started working, I knew a lot of pro-union Republicans who were vocally pro-union. It wasn't a political party that said, no, it's in our platform to stick it to you. It's insane. And I look at this and I think about how it's changed my life. And I say this all the time. As a kid, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. We were poor. And because of this union card that I've carried in my wallet over 30 years, I now live in a neighborhood with doctors and lawyers. And that's not bragging. That's simply saying what is. And that path, that path is possible for anybody. That path is possible. They hire every day. I also tell the story that, I drove a truck for years. I've never driven an unsafe truck because I have the power to say no. And I ask my truck driver buddies, how many of you can say that you've never taken a truck down the road where the brakes didn't work? How many of you can say that you've never taken a trailer down the road where the lights weren't functioning properly? How many times can you say that you didn't deliberately take something down the road that you knew you could get a citation for? That was unsafe and shouldn't have been on the road. How many people can say that they've never done that? I can't, because at the end of the day, if something was wrong with it, I made sure it got fixed. The only place that truck would move is from where it was to the shop to be fixed, or if we were out on the road, a vendor was coming to take care of it. Because I had protections. And this is where I think a lot of people have been sold on this divisive stuff. I hear people say, well, unions just want my money so they can spend on politics. Nonsense. They can't spend dues dollars on politics. It's illegal. It's been illegal since 1947, but that doesn't stop the right-wing spin machine from lying to you at every turn, and you don't seem to care. It is illegal. 1947, Taft-Hartley made it illegal. Now, do they raise PAC money from their members? Absolutely. And that's what they spend on political action. That's how they educate their members. That's how they do the things that they need to do to stop from being eliminated by politicians who, well, take tons of corporate money that they spend on politics. I mean, this is how bizarre this is. We're basically saying there's this big bad labor movement, and they're greedy, and they only want your money for dues and all kinds of nonsense. And then we're going to handicap them to where they can't fight back. We're going to beat them, and we're going to suppress them, and we're going to do everything we can do to hinder their ability to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, while still demonizing them. I mean, I wish labor was as big and as bad and as bold as the right wing wants their minions to believe. Right now in the private sector, there are 6%. 6% of the workers in the private sector are members of labor unions. 6%. That's such a small number that you wonder why they're afraid. Well, why they're afraid is because that 6% could easily go back to the 35% where it should be, when we had the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization, where my grandparents were able to afford to buy a reasonable house, have automobiles, take vacations, raise their children, save for retirement, do all those things on one income. When my grandmother went to work after my mother and her siblings were up in the upper years in school and out of school, that's when she went back to work. But they were able to raise their family and have someone home to raise the kids on one income. That's because they fought for the wealth that their labor created. Because we hear this all the time, don't we? Or at least we used to. It's not so much anymore, the meritocracy argument. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Because I think most of us we now know it's total BS. We now know it's total bunk. But it was there for a while. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And yet, we see this study coming out that says, look, had minimum wage, which is now $7.25 an hour, kept up with productivity, the work that we do, the profit that our labor creates, had it kept up with that as it did from the end of World War II till the middle 70s, that minimum wage would be almost $26 an hour. So when I hear people say, oh, we can't possibly have 15 is just way too much, you go, no, it should be 26. It should be higher, and everybody's wages should be higher. But what we've done, and this is the bait and switch, this is the sleight of hand. What we've done is we've created the most prosperous wealth class in the history of civilization. In this pandemic, the top 700 wealthiest people in this country saw their wealth go up by $1.8 trillion, and yet somehow we can't get health care for workers. We can't pay a reasonable wage. Why we can't do those things, why we can't invest in infrastructure or a college for our kids or early education for our children or health care for granny or goggles and chompers and all that for Medicare, is because we've given all the wealth to the very wealthy. And then we're told, well, we can't afford that. We're broke. Got Joe Manchin. Well, we need a strategic pause. When we know there's tons of money on the table. Anybody who's ever sat down and negotiated anything knows you got to look where the money's at. And where the money's at, it's in the top 1%. The people who are cheating us on taxes like crazy. In fact, the Treasury Department this week came out with a thing that said, look, the tax gap, the gap between what we're expecting and what we get, it's over $600 billion a year. So over a decade, they estimate $7 trillion in wealth that should be coming in to fund our roads and bridges and education and all the things. That's not. And where is it going? Overwhelmingly to the very wealthy. Overwhelmingly to those who already have so much more. And yet, what do? We demonize the poor. We demonize those people. There are 47% of people who don't pay federal taxes. And I remember when Mitt Romney uttered that back in 2012, I go, I know 47% of people who are dying to pay federal taxes. I know people who would pay federal taxes in a heartbeat if they could, because it would mean they would be getting a raise. They'd get more money in their paychecks. They would earn more. The reason that you at that point had 47% of people who weren't paying federal income tax is because they were making poverty wages. So let me ask you this: if you're one of those folks, you're one of the 47% who didn't pay federal taxes, would you like to pay taxes if it meant you made another $20,000 a year? Of course you would. But that's not going to happen because, well, we're not going to raise the minimum wage, and we're certainly not going to let you bargain for better wages, hours, conditions at the workplace, which is where I'm a trade unionist. I believe we do that in the workplace. We open up the books and go, hey, this is what you made. Meritocracy. Oh, you made this off of my labor? I want some of it. And I say this all the time. I hear people go, wow, unions only protect the lazy people. No, they don't. Unions don't want lazy people. They don't want those headaches. They want people who come to work and do their job. They want companies that are going to be profitable. Why do they want profitable companies? So when they sit down to renegotiate contracts, this isn't rocket science. Not hard to figure out. When they sit down to renegotiate the contract, they go, well, there's more money here. We want it. We want more. We want what our wealth, what our labor creates. We want part of that. And it's counterintuitive to say we want people who are going to come and be lazy. If there's a lazy person on the job, that's the employer's problem. They're the ones who've mismanaged that person. But you never get that conversation. It's always easiest just to attack the union, the evil union, who just wants your dues dollars without actually thinking about, the wages, hours, conditions that you get out of it. I say all the time, the $65 a month I spend in union dues, best money I spent. I wish I could take every dime I have and put it into that kind of an investment so that I could reap the kind of benefits that I've gotten. And this is where every working person should too. Back to my grandfather. If a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you don't need something, you've got to spend two to get it. It's that simple to me. But the question is, will we learn? Look, the polling numbers are great. Right now, union approval ratings are at the highest that they've been because, look, employers have been really horrible. Some of the horror stories that I've heard about, coming to work and not knowing when you're going home, and the kind of abuse and the kind of treatment, there should be an explosion of people joining and forming unions. Problem is our labor laws are so badly broken. The problem is employers, the pendulum has swung to their side decidedly. And what has to happen is we have to wake up to the reality that we've got to fight this stuff. We've got to pass laws, which is why I want to see something like the PRO Act get pushed through. It is insane to me that a majority of workers can say, yes, we want a union. And you would then end up having a company saying, no, we're going to shut the doors. We're going to do all of these things. We're going to harass you, intimidate you. We're going to pull you into captive audience meetings and threaten you. We're going to fire people, and there be no recourse. Well, there's a recourse. Generally, posting of the notice, promising not to do it again. And that's usually 30 or 60 days. 60 days if you're a really bad company. 30 days usually. Slap on the wrist. Don't do it again. Promise. And this is where, again, it comes back to us, though. I keep saying we need a much more militant working class. We need people who are going to step forward, speak up, and demand better. For me, it's just that simple in my view. I'd love to hear yours, though. You got any horror stories? You got any good stories? I want to hear it. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. We got a long way to go, folks. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1897. Striking coal miners marched on a coal mine in Latimer, Pennsylvania. Earlier that year, the miners had gone out on strike. Most of the miners were German or Eastern European immigrants. The Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre Coal Company had laid off workers, raised fees for homes and doctors, and forced longer hours on those who still worked.
By August 16th, 2,000 workers had walked off the job in the mines. Most of the miners joined the United Mine Workers of America. The strike ended on August 23rd when the company agreed to the workers' demands, including a 10-cent an hour raise. However, when the raise went into effect on September 1st, only a few workers were given the raise. 2 days later, the miners went back on strike. This time, they demanded a 15-cent an hour raise. A week later, between 5,000 and 10,000 miners were on strike. And on this day in labor history, about 300 to 400 miners marched to a mine in the town of Latimer. They carried before them a large American flag. In the lead up to the march, Luzerne County deputies were openly heard bragging about how many miners they would kill. When the miners reached Latimer, Luzerne County Sheriff James Martin and the coal and iron police deputies met the strikers at the mine and ordered them to disperse. 60 deputies, armed with Winchester rifles, hid behind a low rise along the route of the march. The deputies opened fire, killing 19 strikers in cold blood and wounding as many as 50. All of those killed were shot in the back. The state actually put the coal and iron police deputies on trial. But despite the overwhelming evidence that the workers were shot in the back, all were acquitted. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Here's a hot topic for Labor Day: heat. It's been a hell of a hot summer, exploding the top off thermometers with triple-digit readings across the country. As we're learning, week after week of this debilitating heat intensifies wildfires, causes electric grids to fail, kills millions of wild animals, including fish, burns up crops, and concentrates toxic air. But there's another impact that draws little notice. Heat kills workers. Indeed, searing days of 95, 100, 110 degrees are killing and injuring more U.S. workers each year than all the floods, hurricanes, and tornadoes combined. Those toiling outdoors, including farm workers, roofers and carpenters, airport ground crews, landscapers, road and street repairers, letter carriers, and trash collectors, are in the direct line of fire for this invisible, insidious killer. But working indoors is no better if there's no AC, for metal and stone warehouses and manufacturing plants become ovens. Then, welcome to climate change. 20 of the last 21 years gave us the hottest temperatures on record. Unsurprisingly, the yearly number of worker heat deaths in that period doubled. Also, researchers have determined that extreme workplace heat is causing about 170,000 people a year to suffer injuries on the job. The impact of heat is poorly understood, even by workers. A sudden heat stroke is not the only worry, for rising body temperatures can quickly fuzz the mind, weaken muscles, numb concentration. So workers fall, their hands get caught in machinery, they touch the wrong wire, etc. This is Jim Hightower saying America's power elites literally don't feel the intensity of this heat. So the richest country in the history of the world continues to subject millions of its people to senseless suffering and death, not even talking about this embarrassment, much less stopping it. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at Hightower Low.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It's our all-star panel hour. This week on the program, I'm going to share some thoughts on 20 years since 9/11. How's the world changed? What do we remember? What things did we expect to happen? What did happen? And is there a way to undo some of the horrible damage and the things that came out of it? We're also going to talk about what's going on in Texas, some rewriting of history by our friends in the party of Lincoln, who seem to love Robert E. Lee, which is kind of weird. But hey, like anything the GOP does, the opinions change, the history changes. Just depends on who's rewriting it on that day. But here to share some thoughts on our topics for the day, our all-star panel of Rich Ojeda, national spokesperson for No Dems Left Behind. Rich, thanks for being here.
Hey, everyone.
Also, Sarah Burris, reporter over at RawStory. Sarah, thanks so much. And, of course, Scott Dworkin.
Yo,
co-founder
what's up, Rick?
of the Democratic Coalition. And so he says hello, so good. Glad to see everyone here and not leaving me hanging.
You got it.
Let's start with 9/11. You know, the 20th. I hate to call it an anniversary. It's been 20 years. I want to go around the room and let's start with you, Rich. You know, where were you? What do you remember? What's that? Everybody knows where they were, but what sticks with you?
I was a young captain stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was actually down at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and we were training one of our units that was getting ready to go to Kosovo. And I was driving through what we call the box, and I went to a checkpoint, and the person told me that a plane had just crashed into a building in New York. And of course, we thought that was horrible, but we continued on. And literally about 30 minutes later, I went through the same checkpoint, and that's when they told me that a second plane had hit the second tower and that we were under attack. And they also told me that the Pentagon had been struck. So I went and I found a person that had a 4-inch black and white television, and we sit in his Humvee and we watched the towers fall. And I will tell you that I knew immediately that our lives were about to change. And absolutely, you know, for the next 20 years, we have been going nonstop. And
you especially. I mean, you know, I think the rest of us, you know, we probably saw it from different perspectives. You right on the front lines of this, knowing, you know, where you're going somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it was scary for everybody. You know, I'm a combat soldier, and you know, we train for war, and then all of a sudden you're faced with it, and you know that you're going to be a part of it, and you also realize that, you know, when we finally do put boots on the ground, people's lives are going to be at stake, and sadly, you know, when we go to war, usually what happens is we do lose people on both sides of the aisle. And that has remained true, and that's just how it was.
Yeah, Sarah, let's go to you. What do you remember of the day?
I was about to go to school, and I didn't, because I turned on the TV and was terrified and didn't understand what was happening or what was going on. I was a little kid whenever the Murrah building was bombed, and I remember when. I know that there were a couple of people that I went to school with that whose parents, like I think one of my friend's dad was an ATS agent who wasn't in the building, he was in the field. We knew somebody else whose dad was an FBI agent who was in the building who was killed. And so when that happened, nobody at school ever talked to us about it. You know, nobody had like a meeting to be like, okay, let me explain to you what a terrorist is. And so when I sort of saw that happen to the towers, it kind of made me feel like, oh crap, now everybody's going to experience what we did in Oklahoma City. And there's a whole world that is going to have to, a whole generation of people that are going to have to learn what a terrorist is and what that means, and how scary it was. I was so terrified. And I remember I called my mom because she was at work, and she wasn't answering the phone, and I was so scared because my mom wasn't answering the phone. And I called my grandpa, he wasn't home, and he didn't answer the phone, and like nobody was answering the phone, and I was so scared. Yeah, even in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean that's traumatic. And it's one of those things where, you know, to follow up on this, I had a friend who lived in the UK who said afterwards that, you know, now you in America are going to get to know what we've been living under, you know, for years because of all the bombings that were going on in the UK for years before. Your loss of privacy, your loss of ability to move freely. And sadly, she was right because we did lose a lot of that. Scott, let's go to you. What do you most remember?
I was in school, and it was, I think, one of the first weeks of school. I just started college, and everybody was either hungover or tired, and nobody believed when you heard whispers. And I just remember the announcement of like classes shutting down, and the visuals of everything. Remember, we didn't have cell phones. For anybody who doesn't remember, we didn't have cell phones that had like visuals and things like that. We had like text and things like so. we didn't really have news spreading like that. And then when it did happen, I remember my phone not working in North Carolina, and it just, you kind of freaked out a little bit. Then you go back to your dorm and you're isolated in your little island, and we're like partying like it's the end of the world. You know what I mean? So there was that kind of a moment where we realized some kids started leaving school because they were either in the National Guard or they joined the military right after that. I had a lot of friends that were inspired to join the military just because of that event. They left college, they left their home, and they went straight over there. And most of them did not come back. Whether they did come back physically, they did not come back mentally, or they died over there. But I also, right after 9/11, I was able to visit the site in New York City, and then that same day, by happenstance, Mr. Giuliani, while he was mayor, comes into the Italian restaurant that we're in, and he gets like this standing ovation that I've never heard in a restaurant ever before, and how far he's fallen. But yeah, it just was seeing it firsthand. The smoke and stuff like that it still was like a haze over it. So that burned in my memory forever. Like, and you just, even when you walked away from it, or if you were in a different borough, like you could see it from wherever you were, you could see like a haze. It just felt like the energy was very weird. It was very positive. People were really nice to each other. It was very upbeat, and patriotism was at a peak that I've never seen before. So it was interesting to see it firsthand after it had fallen a few weeks later, but it's terrifying.
Yeah, no, I remember I was in Cleveland. My grandmother was having a knee replacement surgery. And I remember being there bright and early in the morning and hearing about the first tower. And then when we saw it on TV, and everybody in the hospital, I mean, there were literally hundreds of people packed into this little waiting room, and just silence, the kind of silence that I still remember to this day, that people just can't believe what they were seeing. And I remember going, this is the end of the world that I know. And that night when we left to go home, I went to stop to get gas, and gas had gone up to like $8.50 a gallon in the city of Cleveland, because there was this kind of panic. And the one thing that I do give George Bush credit for is he did step forward in that moment and give a little bit of leadership that kind of calmed us a little bit. But sadly, and this is where I'm going to go back to you, Rich. I mean, I look at the aftermath, and looking back 20 years since that. And I know there's been a lot written about, the Project for a New American Century had their report in the 90s that, the conservative movement needed a Pearl Harbor type event to move forward on all their wet dream list. I would argue that they were right, and sadly, we didn't do enough to stop them.
No, I mean, I think, looking back, it bothers me. It bothers me knowing that we had Osama bin Laden held up in the Tor Bor Mountains, and our guys were listening to their communication on the radios. That's how close, and then all of a sudden to be pulled back and then redirected to invade Iraq. This should have never lasted 20 years. It's taken, countless lives. And we're not even talking about those that were injured, that returned home missing arms, legs, suffering with PTSD. I mean, I take enough sleeping meds every night to knock out 2 horses. I have a hard time remembering names from traumatic brain injury. I've got brothers that were very, very close to me that are no longer with us. And I sometimes I think, why? Because the only people that really, were the victors here were these companies, the military industrial complex. And I feel like, looking back now, I kind of feel like we were all done horrifically wrong just so people could pad their pockets. And we've got people that we can't bring them back.
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, you go back to the history of this country. And I remember in high school reading Smedley Darlington Butler's War is a Racket, because I had a high school history teacher who was kind of into that kind of stuff. And I remembered that, as we were going into this race to war, because you knew this was going to lead to some major kind of war. And I still remember, his quote of, I was high-priced muscle for the bank boys and the sugar interests and all this. We basically fought World War I, according to him, for the billionaires to profit. And sadly, as many of us were calling to ensure that soldiers didn't get dumped like they did after Vietnam and didn't get left behind. I don't know that we've done enough. Sarah, your thoughts?
What's interesting, along with that, in the project for a new American century and all of the people who profited, if you look now, I think it's Paul Wolfowitz, Karl Rove, and some of the other Bush people have published articles in the last couple of weeks trashing Biden for, the way that he exited Afghanistan. And it's kind of like a band getting back together to do a national tour on really poor international decisions. So all of these stories, you just kind of want to lump them together and be like, here are the people we don't want to listen to again, ever. Just go away and be quiet. Your time is done.
Yeah, when R.A. Fleischer jumps in, I want no part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible situation, but again, it's all built up to this. So there's no easy exit. President Biden didn't have an easy way out, but at least he got us out. And I'll repeat again, if you look at the situation now, there are 80,000 plus Taliban. There's thousands of members of ISIS-K. There were planned potential attacks. He was able to extend that because he knew that it wasn't possible to get that many people out that quickly. And we were basically surrounded. So I don't know what kind of dreamland, but you heard Republicans just attacking from every side. But the most common thing that they're doing nowadays is they're siding with the Taliban, and whether they know it or not, they're pawns with the Taliban at this moment. They're really falling into them, probably mixed in with Putin and his interests over there as well. But it's sad, it's pathetic, and I wish that if channeled some of the 9/11 patriotism that we had then, where we kind of all gathered around the president, whether or not you supported him or not, you were an American and you supported each other. You didn't attack each other or look for ways. Oh, he looked at his watch. Let's replay that 15 times, because he definitely looked at his watch. I promise you. Like that kind of low grade it's just disgusting. So I wish that people could recall exactly how it's supposed to be done, and not just let's find a way to attack him, because they're falling into a trap where they're actually not just attacking Biden, and for the most part, they're just attacking America in general.
No, because you're right. I mean, right after 9/11 happened, George Bush's approval ratings were, like none ever seen, because the country wanted him to do well. There was no one who was saying, I hope he fails. There was no one at that moment saying, we're going to make him a one-term president. There was none of that stuff. There was, we've got to take care of business. We got to go get bin Laden. Nobody wanted a 20-year war. We were all sold on this idea that it was going to be just like going into Iraq the first time. It was going to be a weekend in the sand. We'd have the parties. It would be great. We would win. And that didn't happen, Rich. I mean, and people, and Dick Cheney himself knew that if you go in and you occupy, you're in for the long haul.
Let me tell you, I can remember in the beginning, it was like anything we wanted. I mean, if you took your annual budget, and this is a fact, your annual budget, and you went and spent it on whatever, as long as you listed and checked that block that said for the global war on terrorism, they refunded every single dime back into your account the following day. And you had everything. I mean, and we saw it. I saw the fraud, waste, and abuse. And and that's one of the things that really angers me more than anything, looking back now, realizing that we were over there to protect the interests of these companies. We were over there so that they could continue to make money. We should have come home in May of 2011 after we killed Osama bin Laden, and we could have had the parades, and we could have said we got him, and we this was our victory, and we stayed for another 10 years. And we lost more lives, and we sent more troops home broken. We spent another $1 trillion. And it just, I look back, and like we see these people that are now jumping all over, President Biden. They're the ones that set this up so that we would be there for 20 years. I don't want to hear from Karl Rove. I don't want to hear from Dick Cheney. I mean, we're not hearing from Rumsfeld, and I'm hoping that he's rolling in hell right now. So that's just how I feel.
No, and I get that a lot from a lot of veterans who, like Scott said, right after this happened, there were, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who were immediately going to sign up because we're going to defend the country. And they went for all the right reasons.
Well, we were gung ho. Look, I crossed the border at 2:30 in the morning into Iraq, and I was looking for weapons of mass destruction. Never found them because they didn't exist.
So how do we go back? And again, this is something I want to talk a little bit about in the next segment. So think about it for a bit, because we were lied into this. And I've got friends who were in Congress at the time who were saying, I can't tell you what we were shown. I can't tell you the lies that were given to us when we made our vote. And there's nobody there holding them accountable. And this is, for me, one of these weird moments where I don't know that we've ever gotten to the bottom of 9/11, who was responsible and who was responsible for moving us in all of these directions that we've gone. But I'll tell you the one thing I do know: this is not the country that I grew up in. This is not the country that I wanted to leave for my children. And we've got an awful lot of work to do to undo some of this damage. So I got to take a quick break right here. On the other side, I do want to talk about how do we go back, and is there a way to go back and find out what went wrong and who do we hold accountable, or can we hold anyone accountable? So we're going to take a quick break here with Rich Ojeda, national spokesperson for No Dems Left Behind, Sarah Burris, a reporter over at RawStory, and of course, Scott Dworkin, co-founder of the Democratic Coalition. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share some thoughts on what's going on. Going to take a quick break right here, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1965. That was the day the Delano grape strike began in California. The strike came a year after activists had forced Congress to end the Bracero contract labor program. The Filipino Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, led by Larry Idalong, Philip Vera Cruz, and others, called the strike against the Delano growers and the Coachella Valley grape growers. It had been a record harvest. Farm workers demanded higher wages, humane working conditions, and union recognition. When the growers refused, thousands walked out of the fields. A week later, the Mexican-American National Farm Workers Association, led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, joined the strike. It was a historic moment. Within a year, the two unions would merge to form the United Farm Workers. The union sent strikers to the Oakland docks to persuade the longshoremen not to load non-union grapes. Many of the Filipino workers in the San Joaquin Valley worked in the Alaska fish canneries organized by the ILWU in the off-season. And so the ILWU honored their union brothers' request. Thousands of cases of grapes were left to rot on the docks. This initial victory led Chavez to organize a grape boycott against heavyweights DeGiorgio and Shenley Industries. 6 months into the strike, union leaders marched 300 miles from Delano to Sacramento to bring attention to their struggle. They hoped to pressure growers to the negotiating table and legislators to act on their behalf. For 5 years, the strike and boycott continued with marches, organizing, and picket line arrests. Gradually, the UFW began winning higher wages, union recognition, and hiring halls. Finally, in 1970, a collective bargaining agreement covering 10,000 workers was reached. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So evidently Bill O'Reilly is predicting he's going to wind up in prison. And look, while I think he probably should be there for one reason or another, falafels and loofah sponges maybe. This, I don't know. He's claiming that he's got a new book coming out. He's claiming he knows the secret war on terrorism because he claims to have all this classified information. And look, I would love to see it because, as I said in the last segment, I've got friends in Congress who are chomping at the bit, or who were in Congress, chomping at the bit to tell what they were presented, which got us into these wars. They want to tell what was there. They just can't. So for me, this is a moment to reflect on this 20th occasion. I hate saying anniversary, but also maybe a way to look back and go, how do we get that information? And here are share some thoughts on, can we get it? And should Bill O'Reilly go to jail? Is our all-star panel, Rich Ojeda, national spokesperson, No Dems Left Behind, Sarah Burris, RawStory, and Scott Dworkin, Democratic Coalition. Let's start with you, Scott. Should he go? Should we be locking up Bill O'Reilly for claiming he's got classified information? Or is this just pure hype pitchman kind of carnival barker stuff?
There are dozens of other reasons that Bill O'Reilly should go to jail. And so, I mean, we can start with those. That's why I found it funny. I'm like, well, maybe you should go to prison for, you know, your harassment and everything else that you've done. I think he's just building it up, and then it'll be like a proof of smoke. It'll be something that either doesn't exist, or if he does, like, why do you wait so long to release whatever he's talking about? A lot of it just doesn't make any sense. So I would assume that if he is making these claims, now that we have a working U.S. government, that he will hear from them through the attorneys, and the attorneys will say that it's hyperbole, blah, 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 blah. It's not really what it is. It's documents that were publicly accessible, but he had to get a FOIA, like something like that, where it's very easy to explain. I don't think that he is going to be in prison for that. But for something else, I would assume that he's, you know, corrupt on taxes and everything else. So I wouldn't be surprised with that. But with having documents in his possession as if he's reality winner, I doubt it. He doesn't have a bone in his body to actually hold on to something like that. And he's too wealthy to risk something like that as well. So there's no way that he has some kind of documents we haven't seen before that are illegally in his possession. And if they are, then the DOJ has to arrest him, and they have to do it now. And
right.
So I just
a lot of this stuff is already available from the 9/11 Commission. We had a pretty extensive report that I think was in 2 different volumes. It was so big.
Mm-hmm.
That detailed pretty specifically about who was asleep at the wheel and what we knew and when we knew it and who didn't act. And you know, there's a lot of stuff that's not a secret. What is a secret is who was lying about what and who made up stuff to get us into Iraq. That's a horse of a different color. And I think, you know, we should get to the bottom of that. I don't really, you know, like the Afghanistan thing, I think everybody understands, okay, we wanted to go after bin Laden, but I mean, geez, the Iraq war was just a farce.
Bill O'Reilly, you know, he's a news media person. He doesn't have a top secret security clearance. So, you know, if he has information that is, you know, that level of information, then ultimately it's somebody who let him know about that is the person that's really in trouble. I wouldn't put it past Bill O'Reilly just to be doing this to try to, you know, spark up book sales.
Yep.
But yeah, I doubt very seriously that he has any type of security clearance that allows him to be read on any of the information like this.
Yeah, but
this is Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah, but in his very pompous kind of I know everything kind of way, he said, quote, "I know as much about American security as anybody on the planet." He knows more than you do, Rich.
Okay, well, I mean, I have a top secret security clearance, and I never saw him in any of those meetings. So, you know, whatever.
He sounds like Donald Trump when he says that stuff, right? It's like the hyperbole where you're like, I know everything because I am Bill O'Reilly. Thus saith the gods that anoint me with my Bill O'Reilly-ness and all of my top secret information. It just doesn't...
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if he has information, the only major issue is how did he get that information?
Yeah.
And if it's that level of information, then that's a serious situation, and it must be investigated. Without a doubt, just like what Scott said, you know, the DOJ has to be involved in this.
Yeah, sadly,
and I would like it. Let's let him go down.
You can't really dig up 9/11 info anytime soon, and let me tell you why. The former president was the most corrupt president in the history of this nation, and we have so many other probes that we have to go through that are an imminent danger to us that involve domestic terrorism that we need to focus on first. including January 6th, including the planning and implementation of this September 18th. We have to look at everything that he did during his entire presidency. Then we can eventually revisit what led to everything overseas past 9/11. But until then, we can't really look into it because we're too busy, spread too thin.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset if he's got stuff, I'm not even all that concerned about where he got it. I think we should be finding out if it's real, and we should be holding people accountable. I'm at this point where we've been lied to so often, so many times that it's time that we hold these people accountable, because this is where some of the anger. And I have some Trump supporter friends who, yes, and I still do have a few. Who I still have a little bit of respect for, because honestly, they're not entirely wrong when they look at our political system and go, nobody's ever held accountable. And this is just another one of those things that go, we never go back and put people in jail at those levels. You and me, we do something wrong. Rich, you would have done something wrong. You'd be behind bars. But the Cheneys, the Wolfowitz, the Rumsfelds, the Gonzalezes, go down the list, the Billy Barrs, the whole clan.
The problem that we have in this country right now is that, and you're absolutely right. I mean, if we were going to hold people accountable and these people wasn't above the law, then Loeffler and Perdue would have already been arrested for insider trading. I mean, look at what these people are doing right now, and I'm hoping that we see something out of McCarthy and Marjorie, Trainwreck Green and the rest of them that are threatening, telecom companies to obstruct justice. I mean, well, Scott is right. There's so many things going on right now that requires investigations to get to the bottom. But at the end of the day, I want to see these people go down. I want to see Cheney brought to justice. I want to see these people, because at the end of the day, we went to war. We spent 20 years at war. We broke a lot of people. We all lost a lot of brothers and sisters in arms. And for what? So that their organizations could pad their pockets. And I want to find out if that is the truth, because I believe that it is. And I want them to be held accountable. I want people to not be above the law, but once again, when are you going to do something about Trump? He spent 4 years as a crime family and nobody's done nothing at all to him.
And we spent how many trillions of dollars on Iraq and Afghanistan, and now you've got people like Joe Manchin saying, "Oh, well, we can't pass this budget that pays for paid family leave, and child care, because we're in too much debt."
I want Joe Manchin to go down. I want Joe Manchin to go down for his daughter with the EpiPen issue, and while his wife lobbied to make sure that schools in 13 states had to carry those pens. That's a crime family, is what it is. I want to see Manchin go down. He's garbage. I bust him every single day. You should see the messages I send him.
Good for you.
Scott, you want to chime in?
No, I'm good. I'm good. No.
So this week also, President Biden canned a bunch of people from the advisory boards of our military institutions, of the academic institutions. Kellyanne Conway was the one who led the way. I don't know why Kellyanne Conway or the Stirrup Woman or a couple of them were there, because they don't really have any military background. Someone like Spicer, I can maybe see.
She served in the Bowling Green Massacre, Rick. I mean,
Rick,
a lot of people don't know that.
This is why. And let me tell you, this is what the Republicans do right. Yes. The Republicans play the long game.
Yep.
By putting Kellyanne Conway and Sean Spicer and those people on the boards of the military academies. They could literally look at these people and look at their backgrounds and say, these people that are coming here to these places are going to become the leaders of our military for tomorrow. So let's look at this person. Yeah, he's kind of a Democrat background. Scratch. Let's get this person here who's got a conservative background that maybe 10 years down the road, we can convince to do something else. I'm telling you, this is them playing the long game. And I'm glad that they finally got rid of him, and it shouldn't have took 6 months.
I agree.
Yeah, even if it took them, it did take them a while to do that. And obviously he's had other priorities. I'm not going to defend that. But I think also after he had lost and Trump really knew that he lost, I think he also would be setting up this situation so that it would cause another speed bump, as he did with Afghanistan. He sets him up for failure. He sets Biden up for failure. And I think that the former administration did that a lot. And so this is one of those speed bumps, but that's 18 different people, you know, that were on boards that were not qualified or were too corrupt to be on those boards. So anybody saying McMaster, give me a break. Okay. He was just as corrupt as the rest of them. He was sticking up for him. I talked to his advisors. I've talked to his board members. I've talked to people that worked with him. All of these people were sucked into the corruption, whether they chose to be a part of it or not. They're involved with the biggest crime family, as Rich said, in history, I think, ever in world history.
And now Sean Spicer is playing the victim, where he's just like, how dare you? How dare you insult my patriotism? And everybody's looking around being like, what? Nobody insulted your patriotism. They insulted your intelligence, buddy. Like, come on.
Any patriotism.
Yeah, nobody cares about your patriotism. We care about how dumb you are and what a corrupt fool and you know, somebody who's going to let white nationalists into the military. Like, this is what we're actually concerned about here.
No, and this is one of those moments where, you know, I've been saying now that, you know, the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, now loves Robert E. Lee, which is really just twisted. And you talk to any conservative on any different day, their history changes. They rewrite things. You know, they're the Winston Smiths of our generation. They go back and rewrite what they believed yesterday. And this is another perfect example of this. I mean, did you see the letter that the former guy put out? Except for Gettysburg. And did I miss the history lesson where President Abraham Lincoln was trying to trade for Robert E. Lee? We'll give you Ulysses S. Grant and a general to be named later. Or, you know, maybe we can sell you something. Did I miss how there was a trade maybe going to happen? Because if I'm reading the former guy's letter, that was a possibility that Grant could have gone south, I guess, and Lee would have been leading the north. Am I missing something?
I don't know. What would be something to someone who surrendered, waved a white flag, and lost, and is a traitor by definition? And it's just baffling to me because he was such a freaking racist, just by the book racist, teaching racism to people, and really awful, garbage human being that never should be honored in any way whatsoever in this country. He should have the ranks of Hitler. That's where he ranks in my book.
The best thing about Robert E. Lee is that Abraham Lincoln eminent domained his property and started burying Confederate soldiers on his property. And that's what Arlington National Cemetery is. That land is Robert E. Lee's land that the United States took from him and said, guess what? You know, the dead of this war will be on your land forever. And that continues to this day.
To hear President Trump say the genius of Robert E. Lee. I mean, really? I mean, the guy was a treasonous traitor. I mean, look, I celebrate. I celebrate those statues coming down. I celebrate changing the names. I absolutely look at Fort Bragg, North Carolina as the place that I become who I am. You know, I love Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It's hallowed ground. And change the name. Change the name. Why should we allow traitors to have their names, you know, live on forever? Get rid of them. I have no problems. Let's call it Fort Rafferty. He was the first sergeant that I served with that got killed in Afghanistan. I'll go with that any day of the week.
Yeah,
he was a loser. He was a loser too. He lost. He surrendered. He lost.
Except for Gettysburg. Except for Gettysburg, which, you know,
and apparently the Bowling Green Massacre and the Revolutionary War, where there were planes, something like that, right? Isn't that what he said?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy what this guy comes up with. And the weird thing is, and this is where, you know, I bring it back to, you know, we never really learned our history, because I literally sat here and I'm going, I don't remember Lincoln, you know, in negotiations to get Lee. That makes no sense, because, as you said, he was a racist, horrible human being. This was about slavery. This was about the ideology of slavery. I don't know how a general who's willing to be a traitor to his country would sell his soul a second time to go, well, I've changed my mind, I'm going to the other side because they can win. That's just bizarre.
No, it doesn't make any sense. And a lot of the thing that's really depressing, and I think we're seeing the effects of now, is that we don't have civics in school. We don't talk about a lot of this history, because this is what they're trying to ban. right? These are conversations about slavery and about the Civil War that people don't want to discuss in schools anymore because that's controversial, and they don't want to admit that, you know, that they lost, and they want to try and have the South rise again, and God forbid we ever quote Martin Luther King in classes. We have to ban that. And it's just absurd. Like, this is what our country is becoming.
Yeah, they want to hide the ugly history in this country, and a big part of it is they don't want their kids to realize that grandma and grandpa were the ones that were standing around those African Americans and white people that were trying to fight for, freedoms in the South, pouring stuff on their heads and thumping on them while they were, in a cafeteria sitting at a counter. It's a shame.
Yeah, he also thought that slavery was good for black people. He also thought that it was bad for white people because it was time consuming, and that's a straight up quote from him. So he's just an absolutely awful guy that believed in corporal punishment, did not care about you unless you were a white dude, and a white dude who supported him and his ideals. And this is a guy who was bred from West Point and used to run that military institution. So like he had the background. He had this. It's kind of like how Trump was handed his golden kind of ticket. Robert E. Lee has no standing in the United States of America. Again, he should be mentioned with Hitler, Bin Laden, terrorist, because that's what he was. He was a domestic terrorist. And so
no, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I got to take a quick break here, guys. On the other side, I want to get into what's going on down in Texas, but to highlight like what Rich said a second ago. The reality is, you wait long enough, the history will change, and they do play the long game. The Republicans have always been good at the long game. They fund think tanks for years out. They've got people who are lying around with lots of bad ideas. So when bad things happen, they've got things that they can shove on us. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back on the other side. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Here at The Rick Smith Show, we don't accept corporate advertising. Never have, never will. In fact, we spend most of our time giving corporations the finger. We don't stop the show every few minutes to sell you supplements, beet juice, or whatever snake oil the right-wing loonies are pawning. That's because we're not sellouts. It's also because we're supported by our friends in labor and by people like you. If you like what we do, become a patron by going to patreon.com/Rick Smith Show. That's patreon.com/Rick Smith Show. Give what you can, if you can, and help us fight for the working class majority. Because together we bargain, divided we beg. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So look at what's going on down in Texas, and I got to tell you, I think the Republicans made a huge mistake here. They have energized the otherwise, a Democratic base that was kind of in a lot of different places. Media sending them off, and vaccines not going so well, economy's not doing great. Now they're doing what they said they were going to do. They are going to outlaw Roe versus Wade. They're going to undo it, and they're going to make abortion illegal in this country. And I've had conversations with women for years about, no, they're never going to do it. And I say, no, they're going to do that, and they're going to go even further. The crazy right wing of this country wants to undo the Griswold decision back from the 60s, and your birth control goes, so that you are then controlled by, me, the white guy. Doesn't that make you happy? And that'll never happen. Well, I don't know. Look what's going on in Texas. And here to share some thoughts on the Texas ban and what our Supreme Court did or did not do, our all-star panel of Rich Ojeda, Sarah Burris, and, of course, Scott Dworkin. Guys, thanks for sticking around.
You bet.
So, Sarah, let's start with you because I'm going to start with the woman in the room. Thoughts on Abbott's ban? Thoughts on what they're doing in Texas? Go.
Man, I haven't I haven't been sleeping that well because I'm just so filled with fury and worry, honestly. Like my first reaction was, okay, I know we have a Planned Parenthood in Oklahoma. Do I need to buy a school bus and basically drive it down to the border to meet a whole bunch of women to take them back up, you know, to the city to get, you know, taken care of, to get the whatever health care they happen to need? And you know, I started thinking about, like, okay, can we start an organization for, let's say, pregnant women to hike in Colorado, and we can all meet in Colorado, and then they can just happen to be next door to a Planned Parenthood, right? Like, I was coming up with every single idea I could, trying to figure out how to be able to help these women. And it really shouldn't be on me, right? It shouldn't be on any of us. It should be on the Justice Department, and it should be on the Supreme Court, because this is ridiculously unconstitutional. This is not, even people who are anti-choice can look at this and realize that having vigilantes go after women, putting bounties on women's heads, that is completely unconstitutional. And if the Supreme Court decides that they're going to uphold this, then I think it's time for other states to start saying, okay, well, we're going to do the same thing for people's guns. We're going to do the same thing for people who won't get vaccinated, because that's where this could go. And I mean, I could talk forever on this.
No, it couldn't go there, Sarah.
So infuriating.
It's only going to go after women. We don't do the gun things in this country. It's only going to be after you. And that's the sad reality of the world we're in. I mean, and the weird thing is, I've actually found some women who are going, yeah, I'm okay with it, which is bizarre to me.
It is bizarre. And this is like, the thing that infuriates me too is that all of these guys, Greg Abbott in particular, don't even know how our bodies work. They don't. The whole idea of a 6-week pregnancy is not actually 6 weeks. It's the day that the last day of your menstrual cycle, or the first day of your menstrual cycle.
I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear it.
Basically. And what happened to me, what's crazy is when my partner and I were pregnant, even though it was just me, I know the exact day that we conceived, because both of us were traveling. We had a beautiful Valentine's Day. We had a nice date night. And then I took off and had to go travel someplace else. And then, you know, I was knocked up. And so I knew the exact day. But when I go to the doctor, they're like, well, when was the day of your last period? And I'm like, oh, it was however many weeks ago. And they're like, okay, you're 6 weeks along. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm 4 weeks to the day. I got pregnant on the 14th. I know exactly what day it was. I was there. You know, so this is just really infuriating. The whole science around this, the idea that a heartbeat starts at that time, which is a complete misnomer. The sounds people are hearing is the echo from the machine. When you look at the sonogram, the flicker people see are actually the cells creating the heart. The heart doesn't even exist yet.
Right.
So there's, and not to mention the whole, they actually took heart cells that they put in a petri dish and were able to grow heart cells that then started to beat like years and years ago. You can have a heart beating in a petri dish. So how did that signify life? Like, I could go off on this for hours.
One of the main issues that we have here is that they refuse to educate themselves. I mean, we know if you want to reduce abortion, and everybody should be for that. The Democrats, the liberals are not for abortion, but the thing is reduce it properly. Make contraceptives free. Make sure that equal pay for women is the same as men. A lot of women that go down that path do so because they fear that they're not going to be able to afford that child. So let's help them make sure that they have equal pay for men and women. You know, I mean, when they, one state made IUDs free, and it reduced abortion in that state over 50% like that.
Yep.
You know, there's so many ways that we could reduce abortion in this country, but when you tell people that they can't do it, when you deny these people, then you have to be ready for what's going to happen, because make no mistake about it,
The rich are always going to have access to that one person that will provide that procedure for their daughter who made a mistake. The problem is that the people that are of color, the people that are poor will not get that capability, and they will resort to going into these back alleys. And then we've got to watch bodies stacking up again, and that's unacceptable. What Greg Abbott and them are doing in Texas is absolutely unacceptable. I think that this women's march that's getting ready to take place in all 50 states, I hope that every one of them women absolutely vow to vote out every single Republican in this next 2022 election.
Absolutely. And,
Amen.
I say what you have to do is you have to hold the men accountable as well. I look at my own story. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. Because my deadbeat father ran off, my sperm donor ran off. I don't even know his name, and I don't want to. But it left my mother and I in deep poverty. And she struggled for years just to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. And we were on and off welfare, quite often, because the 70s were not a good time for single mothers. It's not a good time now for single mothers, but it's better than it was. But nobody holds them accountable. Nobody was able to go get him to pay child support or to do any of that. So if you're going to do what they're doing in Texas, wouldn't the first thing be, you know what, we're going to make sure that if you fathered a child, you pay for the damn thing.
Care about the child after the child is born, though. They don't care about anything that happens after pregnancy. I would say the only good news that we have today about this is DOJ filed a suit in Texas or against the state of Texas, hoping to block the entire abortion ban. And in support of what Sarah said, in the lawsuit, it actually says that the law is in open defiance of the Constitution. And what Merrick Garland said verbatim today was the act is clearly unconstitutional under longstanding Supreme Court precedent. And I think that it's really key for people to recognize this is not just in a supportive role. If you're not a female, you have to stand up as well. It's key for anyone else to stand up. All men in this country need to stand up for women. These are our daughters, our sisters, our aunts, our moms, our grandmas, and you want some kind of sleazebag in Texas who doesn't know them to have control over their bodies. That is sick and twisted. Yep. And no one should have that kind of control over anybody, let alone women. I mean, it's just, then he sits there, then Abbott sits there, and this what got me the worst. He sits there and he responds, he's like, oh, well, it does exclude, or no, sorry, it includes the fact, the ban of abortions, including rape and incest. And he's like, but we're going to get all the rapists off the streets. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? So luckily, the best press secretary ever responded by saying, well, if he's got an idea for getting rid of all the rapists that no one ever in the world history has ever been able to do, then we'd be more happy to see it. But that is the kind of ridiculous stuff that we don't need, because he's not going to do that. He's not going to enforce these laws. If he does anything, this is just making it worse. You're making it so women can be criminalized just off assumption, and the presumption of guilt. Oh, you're pregnant. Like, think about that. Think about if they're not pregnant. Like, are they allowed to take custody of those women? Like, are they going to kidnap them? If they're wrong, is that kidnapping charges? If they're like, is it harassment? Like, what if it's an ex-boyfriend and his ploy, he gets dumped or whatever, and his new ploy, his way to harass her is to use the court system to act like she's pregnant, and then all of a sudden she's vilified, she's demonized, and like people aren't thinking about the repercussions here, because again, this is laying the groundwork for nationwide, and so we have to put a stop to it now. That's why Merrick Garland moved so well, at least swiftly, for the DOJ. That is, but that's what I'm worried about. Is people are going to be running out there thinking that, even if it's illegal, thinking that they can, their spouse or whatever, that, if they try to get an abortion, I want my $10,000, I want to turn in my wife. Like, what kind of world are we living in? We don't have the right to do that. And that is not America. That is Afghanistan now.
Yeah, well, the America we live in, the sad reality is, when I first saw this, I immediately thought we're going to see on like A&E or FX or one of these cable. Here comes Dog the abortion hunter, or one of these crazy reality shows where you get some character who's chasing around women's menstrual cycles, and you go, well, that's ridiculous. They could never do it. Evidently, the state of Missouri was doing it. Evidently, the state of Missouri was following women's cycles because I guess you give that away on these apps that are available, and because they wanted to know how many abortions Planned Parenthood was doing. And I'm going, shouldn't we be really concerned about the fact that our government and private corporations know so much about all of us?
Well, we also need to also understand and educate people about Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood they do so much. We should quadruple the funding for Planned Parenthood. That's an absolute fact. They do medical screenings. They do counseling. I mean, they make sure that clinics that proceed with those procedures, they make sure that they're clean and safe. That's the key. But
they
here's
do
another
STD
thing.
tests for men, even.
Yeah, they do. Planned Parenthood does all kinds of stuff. But you know what? When the penalty for abortion is worse than the penalty for rape, that's where we're looking at. That's what we're looking at right now. What's going on in Texas, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, is Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis, are they competing to see who can be the absolute worst? Because the sad part is that I believe both of them are trying to impress Donald Trump to either get his approval for their presidency run, or going to pick one of them up as his VP if he goes in 2024.
Yeah, he's going to totally ignore them. The naivety and utter stupidity. Next week comes out this TV show that I think is brilliant timing. It's called Why the Last Man, and the premise behind it is all men on earth except for one dude dies. And so I think there's going to be a lot of celebration around this show. It's very kind of reverse Handmaid's Tale, where women take over the world. And I have always believed, and this is why I worked for so many women over the last few decades, is I truly believe that women should take over our government, our country. Men had their chance, we ruined it. And I just don't think that we have the prowess and the wherewithal to manage the country. So I think we blew it here. And this is just more proof. I can't get over the fact, like, you want somebody that to accuse your wife or your sister or your daughter of being pregnant, and if she's not, like, how are they going to find that out? How are they going to figure out if she's pregnant or not? And you want that invasiveness? You want some other creepy doctor digging her? Like, no, you get your hands off the women. Like, get your hands off. Like, that's not your business. So, like, how are they going to figure this stuff out? That's my curiosity that I have, because it's disgusting. And at that point, you have forced sexual assault. You have a different kind of rape. You have, and this is just medical procedures guised under sexual assault. So it's just a disgusting precedent. And again, the road that it goes down is so terrible that they have their head up their butts because they don't know what they're talking about. The naivety and we're just going to not talk about sex, and then they won't have sex. And it's like, abstinence ain't going to work, dude. People are going to have sex. So, like, you got to teach about condoms. It all relates. If you teach people, if you educate them, if you provide them with medicine to cure things, to prevent things from happening, you will actually solve problems. You can't just solve it by praying. Thoughts and prayers don't work for anything if there is another solution. Because God, guess what? God created abortion. God created birth control because he created the scientists behind it. You see what I'm saying?
I'm right there with you, but you're putting way too much thought into this. You've really.
But Rick,
no, there's part of me that goes, I'm struggling here. There's part of me that goes, you think that they want to solve a problem. They don't. They simply want to control people.
You're right, but here's the thing, though, I just saw this the other day. Nancy Pelosi is talking about bringing a bill to the floor that's basically going to say that if it passes, that, regardless of what any state does, they're going to have to follow the law of the land, which is Roe v. Wade. And that needs to happen. Nancy needs to go ahead and get that pushed and passed. And then I don't care what Greg Abbott has to say.
Well, the thing I wonder about Greg Abbott, he says that he's going to put an end to rape in Texas. He's been the governor of Texas for how long? And he hasn't been able to do it yet. So what makes you, is this like a campaign pledge? I mean, they have a huge infant mortality rate in the state of Texas. And to be fair, the United States has an infant mortality rate that is way higher than it should be. The industrialized world, we're among the worst.
Yeah.
So if we care that much about babies, there's that piece of it. Then
Yeah,
you've got all these kids who died in the freeze in Texas. Like, since when? And now they're dying of COVID. So since when do you care about life?
Good point. No, absolutely. And look, if we cared about them, especially the poor ones, we would do more for it. This is going to be something that's going to continue on over the coming weeks and months. Guys, I appreciate the input. I hope that you'll come back again next week as we pick up the All-Star panel. Rich Ojeda, No Dems Left Behind, Sarah Burris, RawStory, Scott Dworkin, Democratic Coalition. Guys, appreciate the time, the input. Thanks so much.
Airborne.
Thank you.
If you guys missed any of the program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get it. The podcast, all there for everyone to grab. If you got questions, comments, something on your mind, love to hear it. Issues you want us here on the panel to address, most certainly send them to me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you follow us along on Twitter at Rick Smith Show, Facebook, YouTube, all those places, all ways to interact with our program. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I want to take a second to not spit all over myself. I want to take a second to tell you about our friends over at the Political Voices Network. PVN is a new network dedicated to promoting left-leaning voices like The Stephanie Miller Show, The Thom Hartmann Program, Richard French Live, and of course, The Rick Smith Show. To find these great shows,